So, how many of you guys, with the raise of hands, love to cook? Right? Okay. Better question. How many people love to eat more than cooking? All right. Minyoung all the way in the back, just raise their hand real high. For me, I actually love cooking, and one of the things that I like to cook is actually grilled pork belly, or in Korean, it's called samgyeopsal. And there's three reasons why I like grilling samgyeopsal. One, it's easy. Two, it's cheap. And three, you can't go wrong with cooking it because it's so fatty that whenever it comes out delicious. So I remember one time I was cooking with a bunch of my roommates, and that was the time when Jeff de Guzman was my former roommate, now my former roommate. He was living with us, and I also consider him a culinary expert. And I was really excited that day because I came back to the grocery store, and I was really excited because I bought this giant slab of pork belly, and I got it for a really cheap price. But little did I know how difficult it was to cut up 3 pounds of meat. And I was there, and I was cutting through it piece by piece. And it was weird because the more I kept cutting, the more it got harder to actually cut. And halfway through, I started sweating. And it was like an incredible workout where my arms started to hurt, like my fingers were numb, like it was ridiculous. And I was like, why is this so exhausting? And throughout this whole time, Jeff is just staring at me. And he had this look, like, if you ever know Nancy and Jeff, like whenever Jeff does something foolish, Nancy gives him a look. Jeff was giving me that same look. And he was like, Peebs, what are you doing? Right? And I was like, first I was a little insecure and offended. I was like, what do you want me to do? I'm cutting the meat with the knife. Like, what do you want me to use? You want me to use a scissor? And at that point, he just didn't say anything. He takes the knife from my hand, examines it like he's like a samurai expert or something. And then all of a sudden, he just whips out these stones, wets the stones, and starts like slashing them like left and right for like 5 minutes. And then he just passes it over to me like a boss, right? And he's like, now cut the meat. And I swear to you, it cut like butter. Like the meat literally cut like butter. The reason why I share this story, because I think that's actually a good picture where many of us find ourselves in when it comes to personal growth and development in our lives. Either we wear out or we actually rust out. And what I mean by that is that just like how a knife that's overused will eventually grow dull, if we don't sharpen the tools, which is our abilities, our talents, our habits, our character that we have accumulated over time, eventually we'll find ourselves dulling out and actually get stuck. So what happens is that for some of us, we actually wear out. And those are a bunch of us here that like to overwork. And we think that overactivity will help bring production in our lives, right? And so we think like, if I work harder, if I work more, if I put more hours in, I'll get the results that I want and I'll be really, really effective, right? But as many of us know, the more we do that, it pretty much ends up in burnout and exhaustion and less motivation. In fact, that's what research shows, right? Research shows there's only a certain amount of limit that we can actually work until we get physically and mentally exhausted. And at that point, in a point of overworking, it actually brings down poor health and actually lowers our performance. So even though we think that overworking will bring greater performance, it actually brings lower productivity. And so that means for some of us that do projects and love to work, we're thinking in a misinformed way. And for some of us here that are students, I know it's finals for you guys. And I'm sure some of you guys are procrastinating, right? And you think, okay, I have to pull all-nighters, and that will get me my A, or hopefully an A. But the truth is, it's actually better to actually take a short break or even a nap rather than just push through and just study all night. That's what the research shows. But for some of us, it's not about too much activity. For some of us, it's actually about inactivity. And that's what we call rusting out. Meaning that, like I talked about before the last time I was here, about the law of priorities. And I talked about quadrant 4 stuff, things that are unimportant in our lives. A lot of times that's what we do. That's like when we watch too much Netflix. We binge on Netflix. Or we play too much video games, Fortnite or whatever that is, and it's to the point where we get I call it a glaze. When you're on the screen, you get a glaze, and you just feel disoriented. It's pretty much our brains are rotting. And and it's true because actually, I find this to be interesting because there's a research that says one of the ways to fight against Alzheimer's disease is actually reading, right? And it says because it continues to stimulate your brain rather than having the disease deteriorate it. But I was reading on Pew Research, and they said that actually 1 in 4 Americans actually read, or actually read a book, right? And and I know us New Yorkers, we're like, that's because of the people in the Midwest, they don't read, right? And we come in arrogance about that. But the research also shows that for us that are college graduates, less than 50% of us stop reading after college. So that means less than 50% of you here right now, and I'm not going to point out who, right? We don't read or we stop reading. And so because of that, it deteriorates us and it actually rots our brain. So we rust out. So either we either wear out or rust out, and that actually leads to dullness or mediocrity in our lives. So the 7th habit, which is the final habit and the end to this series, is all about that. It's all about the law of continual learning. And the 7th habit, which Stephen Covey calls sharpening the saw, is all about accumulating all the gifts and assets, habits, and talents that we already have, not gain more of, but already have, and start sharpening and improving them to increase our capacity and our effectiveness, right? So for those who haven't been here, we've been in this series called 7 Habits of Highly Effective Discipleship, which branches off from this book by Stephen Covey, and we've been going through the habits. So real quick, I'm going to say first habits 1 to 3 it's all about self-mastery, right? Habit 1 is about productivity, the law of responsibility of your own choice, right? Law 2 is the habit of vision, which is the law of values. Habit 3 is priorities, the law of discipline. And then that shifts over to the next 3 habits, 4 to 6, which is about interpersonal relationships with one another, right? Because you can't live life alone. I know sometimes some of us want to, but we can't. Life is communal. And so habit 4 is about win-win, about relationships with one another where it's the law of love. Habit 5, it's about understand before being understood, which is the law of judgment, right? Because all of us judge, all of us have certain perceptions and assumptions, whether it's to each other or God. And then habit 6, it's about mutual cooperation, meaning it's the law of connectedness, where we work together, whether it's, once again, through each other or through God. The 7th habit is the culmination, once again, of all those things, where we sharpen those things, improve on those things so we could actually gain a greater capacity of effectiveness. So it's pretty much breaking through our caps. It's breaking through the lids that we all have and saying that there's actually more to grow. The best way to put this is this quote by Abraham Lincoln, Honest Abe, and he said this: if I had 6 hours to chop a tree, I'd spend the first 4 hours sharpening the axe. And what does he mean by that? He's saying that it's not so much about working harder, it's about working smarter, right? And when I go into this, I just want to caution that the 7th habit is not about just resting or relaxing, right? It's not about just doing nothing. And for some of us who are overworking, that might be part of it, but that's not really what this habit is about. The best way I could frame it is from my experience of working out. And I've been working out for like 2 or 3 years, and I've been learning this thing called a deload. And it's called a deload week. How many people here work out? Yeah, kind of? Yeah? All right, awesome. Right, there's a thing called a deload week. And I've been learning this from our church meatheads, Joe and Joe. They are my commissioner and my coach. One makes sure I'm not doing wrong things. The other one just gives me nutritional facts and abilities to help me improve. And they are my coaches, Joe and Joe. So if you find them and if you need any help developing your physical skills, go talk to them. They're really good at it. And so I was talking to them, and they told me, and I was like really tired and really exhausted. And I'm like, yo, I'm so not motivated to go to the gym. And one of the Joes was telling me, "Oh, Peeps, how long have you been working out?" It's like, "Oh, I think I've been going for like 2 months straight now." He's like, "Oh, you need to slow down. You need to take a break." And that's what you call a deload. And I'm like, okay. So, but he says, "Peeps, what I want you to do, and I want you to make sure you don't do, is not go to the gym." And I was like, "What do you mean? You told me to rest. You mean me to slow down?" And he says, when you go into a deload week and when you work out and when you take a break from working out, it doesn't necessarily mean that you stop all activity altogether. What it actually means is that you continue to go to the gym, but you actually lighten the weight and you focus and recalibrate your form. Because when you work harder, a lot of the times that your form gets misaligned. And so use that week to refine and sharpen your foundations. And when you do, you actually become much more effective, and you'll get more gains, as they would say, or you'll start working out a lot more. And I think that's a great way to frame the seventh habit, because it's about recalibration. It's about sharpening in all the different aspects of our lives, which we'll be going into later into the message, so that we could actually increase our effectiveness in our life, in our faith, in every parts of our lives. So that's what I'm going to be talking about today. And I want to go into John 21, where we see this conversation with Jesus and Peter, and for us to really gain some lessons from it. So we'll go into it. Verse 15 says, "When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, 'Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?'" And so what's going on here? Here, once again, we see Jesus and Peter having a conversation with one another. Some would say a confrontation, because at this point, Peter actually denied Jesus 3 times before his crucifixion. And now that Jesus has resurrected, he made a meal with them. He cooked a meal, ate with them, and was spending time with Peter and the disciples. So clearly, at this time that's going on, Peter is feeling really, really awkward. It was a really awkward meal for him, right? Because at one point, or there's a part of Peter that feels like he's excited that his master, his leader, rose from the dead and conquered death. But at the other time, on the other side of him, he's feeling so much shame. He's feeling so much guilt, failures, self-criticism is going all around him. And so you find him in this tension that's going on in his relationship with Jesus, and he doesn't know where he's at, right? And how many of you guys ever felt like that before? You're just feeling stuck. You don't know where to go and how to go about things, whether it's, feeling stuck in your job, right? Feeling stuck in your career, feeling stuck in your relationship, your significant other, your kids, right? Even being stuck in God and your faith, right? We've all experienced that before, where we're feeling this limitation, we're feeling this lid. And this is what Peter is feeling right now. Through all the mistakes and the betrayal that he has done, he's feeling that lid. And you see it clearly in this passage. And so what does Jesus do? Jesus tells Peter, he says to Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" And it's interesting to note, and I hope you catch this, that when Jesus talks to Simon Peter, he doesn't call him by that name. He calls him Simon, son of John. Almost like he's in trouble, right? When my parents, when I do something bad, my parents tell me, talk to me, they don't say Billy. They go, William Kim, right? And that's kind of what it is, what's going on here. Jesus is calling him by his former name. He doesn't call him Simon Peter the Rock, the one that I'm going to build my church upon. He calls him Simon, son of John. And some theologians, some scholars, when they interpret this, they're saying that Peter, because of his betrayal, because of his sin, he's no longer a disciple. And I think there's some truth in that, but I also suspect that the reason why Jesus talks to Simon and calls him Simon, son of John, is because Simon himself is disqualifying himself to be a disciple. Like in Peter's mind and what he has done, he feels like that he can't move forward. He feels like his failures and his sins cannot be forgiven. And this is the place where Jesus is trying to meet Peter at, because that's where he thinks that he is. And that's why Jesus says, do you love me more than these? Because when God asks you a question, it's not really he's asking you a question. He knows what's going on. When you look at the Bible, when God asks any of you a question or any of me a question, is usually more of introspection. And the introspection here is pointing to a place in Peter's life where he feels like he can't move forward. In a way, Jesus was identifying a lid in his life. For example, in human nature, there's actually 4 parts that encompasses the nature of a human being. Philosophers, most philosophers agree on this. Stephen Covey talks about this, and even Jesus addresses it. He says, what is the greatest commandment? Love the Lord with all your heart, all your mind, all your soul, and all your strength. So the 4 components of any human being is the physical, the emotional, the mental, and the spiritual. You like my stick figures? I'm all about stick figures because I can't draw, right? But that's the 4 components. And for many of us who live in the Western world, a lot of times we operate and we live our lives compartmentalized with these 4 separate categories. And for a lot of us, because of that, when it comes to growth and development, we assume that as long as we develop 1 or 2 of these things, we can actually be effective in the life that we live, right? But the reality of life and what Jesus said before and what we're going to see is that life is not very compartmentalized. It's actually more holistic, meaning that it's actually more interpersonal, and it actually overlaps each other more than we realize. For example, I'll show you it this way, and I'll show you how if we could be really functional in 1 or 2 of these things, but if we are dysfunctional in the other 2 or the other 3, we become really, really handicapped. So one of the examples I want to talk about is the mental. We'll start with the mental, because you could actually be physically strong. You could hit the physical lottery and have be an amazing genetic specimen like LeBron James or James Harden. But today, I'm not going to be talking about LeBron James, but I do have to talk about basketball because it is the NBA playoffs. And one of the things, and this is my own personal commentary about as a sports fan, I do not believe in a guy named James Harden and the Rockets. And I talked about this before, but for those who are following in basketball, I do not believe in him because this guy is part of the number 1 team right now in the NBA, the number 1 seed. Most likely he's going to be MVP, meaning that people acknowledge him as the most skilled basketball player right now in 2018. But I do not believe that he has the ability to be a champion. Why? Because every time I see this guy, when it comes to pressured moments, when the things are on the line, his skill, although it's super high, probably one of the best, all of a sudden he just disappears. And so his skill is high, but his mental toughness is low, and that's why someone like James Harden cannot pass the cap of being a championship player. And you see this again and again and again. And so I know some of you guys are bored with basketball, and I know you guys are not basketball fanatics. So let me talk about something that is going on with current events. Let's talk about Kanye West. Right? Everyone knows Kanye West. He's probably one of the greatest rappers of our generation. One of the most talented and skilled lyricists and musician. But what is going on with Kanye West right now? when you have someone that is highly skilled and talented, and then when your mental capacity it's not up on par with that, mixed with delusion, you start saying some foolish and ignorant things. Now, I just want to preface this. I'm not saying that because Kanye West is a college dropout, and I'm not making fun of college dropouts, or I'm saying that there's something wrong to be a college dropout because there's some successful people like Steve Jobs was a college dropout. But what differentiates someone like Steve Jobs and Kanye West is because Kanye West, somewhere along the way, stopped learning history. Right? Somewhere he stopped educating himself. And he made it all about him and all about his skills and his talents. And he came to a position or a point where he said, slavery is a choice. And it's the most ridiculous and ignorant statement that anybody can make, especially someone like him. And so clearly, you see a cap that's actually going on because you see physically his skills are high, but his mental capacity is low, which makes him capped and dysfunctional. Let's move on to emotional. Let's say you are physically strong and you have the mental toughness, but if you don't have the emotional capacity to actually connect and relate to one another, there's going to be problems because life is about relationships, right? And there are so many studies about this where you might have an incredibly high IQ, right? But if your EQ is so low, there's no way to interact and engage with people. You might be 28, 38, or even 88, but you might be treating people or dealing in conflict like you're 8 years old, right? And that's what happens. And because of that, we get capped. One of the stories about that is Steve Jobs. Did you know that he actually was kicked out of his own company? Why? Because he had a hard time dealing with people, right? He was a high, competent, innovative leader, but because of his emotional dysfunction, it capped him. Now, let's say you do have the physical, emotional, and mental, and you have all that there. But if you're eating poorly, right, and you die by 40, you're dead. You're capped. I mean, you can be the most intelligent, smartest, and loving person in the world, but once you're dead, you're capped. So that's the whole point of what's going on here. The point of sharpening the saw, right? The point of continual learning is actually looking through in a holistic lens where all of those things actually come together. And the final part is actually the spiritual, where you could have all those three things, and then if you don't have the spiritual, and what we see from Peter and Jesus right here, where you see the incongruence of values, right? You see Peter who says that, I will follow you wherever you go. I will not betray you. And in the most greatest moment in pressure, you see him becoming the most cowardly. You see the disparity of values. The spiritual speaks into those parts, our characters, what we believe in and what we follow. And you see that today within our president. And it's so annoying, but you hear him every single day on the news because of all his lying, his cheating, his affairs, everything. And he's the president of the United States, right? He is the most influential leader right now, but you see even him, his leadership is capped because of the spiritual part, the values part, the character part. And that's what Stephen Covey is talking about here, and that's what Jesus is trying to identify here. And this is the first point, and it's this. Think holistically, meaning that every part matters. I've talked to many students, and I've seen them so physically exhausted. And you see the overwhelming need for approval going again and again and again, and they know that there's something wrong. And I tell them, you need to work on your mental health. You need to work on those internal emotions that's going on. And they keep telling me, Peeps, I'm going to just push that out for later. Right now, I need to get that A. And more I see, yeah, they're getting the A, but I just see the instability increasing further and further, and it's deteriorating more and more. Sure, for a lot of us, we can actually run through life, maybe even a couple of years, being functional in maybe 2 or 3 parts, but there will be a cap for each and every one of us if we're not aware of it. And for some of us, we might be feeling it now. We might be feeling that cap. For some of us, it's that we stop stop educating ourselves, stop improving ourselves. Some of us, it's about not being aware of our character. For others, it's about not working on our social skills, or it's about not dealing with an internal part of our hearts, whether it's something that's traumatic or a high or unhealthy defense mechanism. But what this passage is saying, and the challenge for us in the first part, is to be aware of these things, because every part matters if we want to hit to the next level. So the question I have for you is, where do you feel like you're stuck right now? Where are the areas where you feel like you're capped? Or for some of us, it might be, where do we need to, what are the things that we need to actually revisit and actually refine and sharpen and improve? And I pray that the Holy Spirit will show you that. Hope the diagram helps. I like diagrams. It just brings clarity. But there's more, so we'll continue. Verse 15. When they had finished eating, Jesus said to Simon Peter, "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" "Yes, Lord," he said. "You know that I love you." Jesus said, "Feed my lambs." Again, Jesus said, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" He answered, "Yes, Lord, you know that I love you." Jesus said, "Take care of my sheep." The third time he said to him, "Simon, son of John, do you love me?" Peter was hurt because Jesus asked him the third time, "Do you love me?" He said, "Lord, you know all these things. You know that I love you." Jesus says, feed my sheep." So why does Jesus ask Peter, "Do you love me?" 3 times? And when Peter responds, why does Jesus say, "Feed my sheep, feed my lambs"? Just on a side note, he's not literally saying like, "Feed my lambs and my sheep," right? Like, not like a pet dog. He's not really saying that. I need to preface that because we might misunderstand. What Jesus is actually saying is that he's asking Peter, it's like, "I want you to be the one to take care of my people when I leave. I want you to be the one to lead." And when you see this, you're just like, why? He just betrayed you. He betrayed you 3 times, right? And he did. He failed miserably. He betrayed him. And to note, that's the reason why Jesus asked him 3 times for every single denial and betrayal that Peter done against Jesus, right? And I think that's important to know, because when it comes to learning, and especially when it comes to God in our learning, he doesn't overlook things, right? It's not like God is delusional about our failures. He's not delusional about our limitations. God is actually deals with reality. You know what I mean? It's not like, the motto which us millennials have fallen into, like, you could do anything that you want to do. This is not what God is saying here. God and Jesus is actually speaking to Peter. He's like directly dealing with the limitation, and particularly in this case, sin, and failure in his life. But what's interesting here is that Jesus doesn't see Peter with a fixed mindset. When Jesus sees Peter and all the mistakes and sin that he has done, Jesus still sees something much more in it. He actually sees a growing mindset. Peter at this moment may not have seen it, and he might feel like he is disqualified, but that's what Jesus is trying to do here and bring out to sharpen. He sees that there's something more, because now Peter actually has something called humility. Peter was the one to say, "I want to be the best." How many people want to be the best here, right? I want to be the best disciple. I want to be the best Christian. I want to be the best leader in the whole world. But in his failure, he realized, I am no better than anyone else, right? And in that humility, in that failure, that's where Jesus comes in, and he speaks into that, and he says, "Oh, okay, Peter, now you can learn. Now you have the capacity and the ability to grow into the shepherd, the leader that I see in you and I call to you." That's actually the definition of what a disciple is. A disciple, by definition, is a learner, is a lifelong learner. And what Jesus is trying to show Peter and trying to show us here is that the 7th habit about sharpening the saw. And when it comes to discipleship, is about humility. It's about embodying it and living that out. For example, I hope I don't butcher this story because I just recently heard it, but bear with me because I'm still learning as a preacher and a communicator. And it was a story that I heard about one of these great global leaders and his relationship with the late Billy Graham. His name is Lon Allison. Henry and I like to call him Captain America. We call him Captain America because he acts like Captain America, and he's very sweet and kind and very humble in that way. And he shares that because it's something that he learned from Billy Graham when the first time he met him. Because this guy named Lon, he shares a story where he meets Billy Graham, and he was actually the former director of the Billy Graham Association. And what's cool about being the director, or now former director of the Billy Graham Association, is that you get to meet him. And this is the first time he engaged with him. And he's excited because this guy, Lon Allison, just mind you, he is an incredible preacher. In fact, he wrote a thesis on Billy Graham and I believe in seminary. And so he's finally getting to meet his hero, right? And you know how exciting it is when you get to meet your hero. You know, this is Billy Graham. This is the guy that preached around the world. This is the guy that spoke to leaders, spoke to kings, spoke to queens. You know, he had an appearance on The Crown. If you guys haven't watched The Crown, right? Like, he is probably the most influential pastor and Christian leader of the 21st century. And Lon actually gets to meet him. And in his first encounter, the first thing Billy Graham says to him, he goes, "Lon, I've been waiting to meet you." And he's like, "Me?" It's like, "I've been waiting to meet you. You want to meet me?" And he goes, "Yeah, I want to meet you." And Billy Graham goes, "Can you teach me how to preach to the younger generation?" And Lon's like, "What the heck?" He thought he was joking. This is Billy Graham. He preached to everyone in the world, every kind of culture and every kind of people in the world, and you're coming to me. I'm green. You have so much experience, and you want to learn from me and how to preach to the younger generation. You know, later on, he asked, and he went further and asked Billy Graham, like, "Why'd you say that?" And he goes, "You know, Lon, I got to tell you, I'm not the greatest preacher in the world." And the truth is, he's not. You know, most people agree, he's not the greatest preacher in the world, but the way he represents God and the humility that he shows influences so many other people. And he said, "I don't know why God chose me, and I don't know why God chose me in a place that I'm not very good at, but I'm trying to be faithful with whatever that God has given me." And it's interesting because if you actually hear the story about Billy Graham, all the people that actually criticize him and don't like him, you know, they actually say that they want to avoid meeting him. And you're like, why? Because they said that if you ever meet Billy Graham, right, and even though you hate him, by the end of the conversation, you start loving him. And they're like, people that are critical are like, "I don't want to do that because I want to hate on this guy. I want to be a hater." Kind of like LeBron haters, like, you know, like, "I want to be a hater," but, you know, like, he was like, all the people that were critical of him wanted to avoid him because when you encounter this guy, he embodied such humility, so much love of the presence of Christ that it actually changed people. You know, and that's the reoccurring story of the life. The reason why I share this story is because I would say Billy Graham is probably one of the best people that embodies humility. Because discipleship, whether you're 18 or 98, it is humility to know that you're still learning. It's humility to know that it doesn't matter what place that you're at. There's still something that you can actually grow into, and learn from people from all different aspects, whether they are older or younger than you, or whether they're your peers. And this is what Jesus is showing to Peter, and this is what Jesus is showing to each and every one of us. It is humility is what transforms things and transforms us and improves us into the best of who we can be and the cap. And honestly, when I look at this passage, I don't know why Jesus entrusts someone like Peter who has failed, but I think it shows you something about the heart of God and how he sees us and how he wants to embody us. Because if we are perfect and we're trying to love people who are imperfect, there is not going to be much humility over there. There's going to be a lot of pride and self-righteousness. But when we are imperfect and know love and unconditional love in our imperfections, no matter where we go, no matter how high or how influential we will be, we will embody that, reflect that, and show that. And that's why Jesus tells Peter and to us to follow me. A disciple, an effective disciple of Christ, is ever growing in that kind of love, ever growing in that kind of posture, ever growing in that type of perspective. So we are always ready to forgive and to be forgiven. We are ready to be understanding and to understand. We're ready to actually give out grace and to receive grace and actually grow in the person that God has called us to be. So today, as we close, I pray that you would really understand that, grasp that, and improve that in whatever place in our lives that God is showing you at today. Let's put up the point. Embrace humility, lifelong learner. Let's pray, guys. Lord, we want to thank you for this time where we could end and close this series to continually learn and grow what it really means to be a disciple and a disciple of Christ.
Let's pray together. Will you lift your hands to the Lord as we just examine our own lives of how we're learning and growing about where we are with the Lord.
If my heart has grown cold, there your love will unfold. As you open my eyes to the work of your hands, when I'm blind to my way, there your spirit will pray. As you open my eyes to the work of your hands, as you open my eyes to the work of your hands, oceans will part, nations come at the whisper of your call. Hope will rise, glory shown in my life, your will be done.
Tell this to the person next to you. If you stop learning today, you stop teaching tomorrow. Now, this is going to happen in everyone's life, and when it happens, it's gonna suck. There comes a point when you realize that your mom and your dad also hits a cap. They tell you to forgive, but then you see bitterness in their life and they can't forgive. And here's the thing, you cannot take someone where you've never been. And you can't teach someone what you don't have. And that's really the law of renewal. The whole point of the gospel is everyone comes to the cross and admits we have fallen. We fall into the things we know. We understand it in our head, but we fail to practice them. And the greatest enemy of great is good. So for a lot of us, you can be good at one thing and think that you're great at everything, and that's when you become delusional. And that's why our measure, first as believers, is Jesus. The way he loved, the way he forgave, the way he encouraged, the way he empowered. That's our measure. And we're all going to fall short. And so the Christian life should, it always doesn't, but should entail the greatest humility. And so one of the things that I want to challenge us to do this afternoon is the language of humility, the etymology of humility. You know what humility sounds like? Tell someone next to you, I'm learning. Not, I've learned that. How many people ever hear someone say, I learned humility? What? Exactly, you have not learned it. Anytime you use past tense etymology means that you have perfected something. The whole point of renewal, the law of renewal, is to say, I am still parsing this in my life. There's a participle, an ing. I'm still learning to dunk in my mind. LeBron is still trying to learn to win multiple championships, but he hasn't yet. He's still learning that. And so we have to change our language about forgiveness. I'm learning to forgive. I'm learning to love. I'm learning to encourage. And that's the whole story of the gospel, that we're never done. We're in this journey. And that's what Jesus invites us to become better people through the law of the saw, through the law of renewal and learning. Because a righteous man, the Bible says, falls 70 times, but what? Rises again. Doesn't give up, but rises again. Let's commit to that. Will you bow your heads for the benediction? May the grace of the Lord Jesus Christ and the love of God and the fellowship of the Holy Spirit be with you now and forevermore. All God's people say, God bless you. Go in peace.